All right, welcome to Dobber Prospects Radio episode 55. I'm Peter Harling. I'm the host of the show. You can follow this show on Twitter at DPR_show. Follow me on Twitter at Farling, Pharling. As always, I'll start off by reminding you to please do me a favor. Hit the subscribe button, give the show a like. If you're listening on iTunes, give us a 5-star review. If you're using something else and they have a review system, go ahead and hit the 5-star button on that one too. So this is a bit of a bonus episode. I mean, I just did an episode last week, and it was almost a month after that. So basically, podcast releases on this show are pretty unpredictable, as you've probably already figured out from the 54 episodes preceding this one. What can I say? We're the gorillas of fantasy hockey podcasts. We don't announce podcasts. We just strike and then sink back into the night. So this episode, putting it out because something happened this week, and I really wanted to get a podcast on about it, and that is Dobber released the 13th annual Fantasy Prospect Report, and I'm happy to say that he'll be coming on the podcast in a little bit to talk about that, and we just shoot the shoot and talk about hockey a little bit, and fantasy hockey as well, so it's a really good conversation. I'm really happy to have, the podcast is called Dobber Prospect Radio, and it's about time we got Dobber on it, right? The quality of the recording on Skype, unfortunately, wasn't very favorable. So I'll do my best to mix with the audio levels a little bit and try and get it as manageable as possible. So I do apologize about the technical difficulties. So the first little segment here, what I wanted to do is also kind of comment about the AHL Finals, which are on. The last episode, I answered a couple of listener questions off of Twitter. And one of the things that I was asked for was an AHL Finals preview. I didn't have time to do the due diligence and the research on it, so I just kind of glossed over that entirely. But the AHL Finals are on now. I had a few minutes today to take a look, and what I decided to do was go through about the top 10 fantasy relevant prospects on each team, and just kind of hit on them a little bit. So first things first, an overview on the AHL Finals. It is Charlotte Checkers, which is the Carolina Hurricanes affiliate, versus Chicago Wolves, which is the Vegas Golden Knights affiliate. And let's see, the path that they took to get to the finals, round one, Chicago beat out Grand Rapids. They faced the Iowa Wild in round two, and then they had a long road trip series with San Diego Gulls in the third round. So that would have been a really grueling series. Charlotte, they took care of Providence Bruins in round one, Hershey Bears in round two, and in the third round, they had to deal with the defending champs, the Toronto Marlies, and I think, if my memory serves me correctly, that was an overtime win, possibly in Game 7 in Charlotte for the Checkers. So, big win there. Now that the series has already started, it's where Game 3 is coming up on Wednesday night. The first two games are in the books. They took place in Charlotte, with the Checkers and Chicago splitting the series. Chicago won Game 1 in overtime, and Checkers won Game 2 5-3. So that was this weekend past. We got the Game 3, 4, and 5 are in Chicago. So this series is a 2-3-2 split as opposed to your standard 2-2-2-1. So the next three games are in Chicago. So the Wolves come out of Charlotte with a split, and now they have 3 home games in a row. Of course, they're going to try and close that series out, but don't count out Charlotte. And then the final 2 games are back in Charlotte. So let's start talking about Charlotte. And I mentioned on the last episode, I think it was, how this team has Ron Francis's fingerprints all over it. When he inherited Carolina, they were not a very good team. They had missed the playoffs for a number of years in a row, and their farm system wasn't great either. He did a really fantastic job of replenishing the prospects and building the team up from the bottom up. Really great job. A lot of the prospects, or the players that are on Charlotte, are players that will be moving up into the NHL sooner than later. This is not a AHL veteran-laden kind of roster. So let's take a look at it. Right at the very top, you got a player who kind of starting to look like an AHL veteran, Andrew Podorowski. He is leading the AHL in scoring. He's got himself 20 points in 15 games with a nice 10-10 split between goals and assists. What's curious about this player is just the other day, on a previous podcast, I mentioned how there are a number of players who, if they weren't made qualifying offers, they would become Group 6 unrestricted free agents. And there's a couple players on both these teams' list that fall into that category, were not signed, and they therefore now will become unrestricted free agents. So Podorowski falls into that category. So it's looking like his NHL playing career days might be over. So despite the fact that he's leading the AHL in scoring, if you have him in your fantasy league, I would be looking at this as a potential opportunity to kind of bail on him. Sticking with Charlotte, the next player on their scoring roster is Morgan Geekie. He's in his rookie season as a pro. He was drafted as an overager, so he went from junior to the pro ranks. He's 20 years old. He's a center. He's got a point-a-game pace going with 16 and 16. In his rookie season, he scored 46 points as a rookie and as a 20-year-old. So that's pretty impressive rookie season. Another player, the young player that they have coming up, Alexi Sorella, he's got himself 13 points so far in the series. Nick Roy, he is in his first full season as a rookie as well. You might remember him as the player for Canada in the gold medal game in the shootout, and he kind of fumbled it, didn't even really get a shot off. If that were me, that would be crushing. That would be devastating for my confidence in my career, but he's looking pretty good. 16 games in the postseason, 4 goals, 13 assists. He looked like he was getting regular minutes and playing an impact role with Charlotte in the games in Toronto that I watched. Speaking of Toronto, Trevor Carrick, he's their top scoring defenseman in Charlotte. He's a former Maple Leaf. He's playing in the AHL right now, of course. He's a restricted free agent, so he may or may not be back with that organization. He's got himself 10 points in 13 games. Not too shabby. Martin Neshcash, highly rated prospect in his rookie season. He's got himself 9 points, 3 goals, and 6 assists as a 20-year-old rookie in the AHL. Julian Gauthier, 2 years removed from the draft. He's 21 now. He is looking pretty great in pro hockey. He's only got 6 points in the playoffs so far, but I still like this kid, and I think he's got potential to make it to the NHL. Maybe not in a top 6 role, but if you're in a Bangers and Mash League, keeping Carlson, then he'd have a little bit of extra value. Hayden Fleury, the next highest scoring defenseman for the Checkers, 22 years old. Some people might be disappointed because he was such a high draft pick and he still hasn't made it to the NHL yet at 22 years old. I don't think that's necessarily a problem. He's got himself 6 points, but he's only played 8 games, so there's been some injury there. Stelio Mathios is in his rookie season. Not even season. I mean, he played in the WHL this year with Brendan Wheat Kings as their captain, and he had a great season there, 96 points. That's fantastic. He's played 11 games with Charlotte in the postseason. He's got himself 3 goals and 4 points. Jesper Sellgren, he's been turning some heads. He is a very late 6th round pick from the 2018 draft, and he's finished up his season over in Sweden playing in the SHL where he had 15 points. He's come over and he joined the Checkers for their playoff run. In 8 games, he's got 3 goals. One of the goals I saw, he scored against the Marlies, and it was just a laser. Really great shot, top corner, beautiful. He's 20 years old. He's a player that looks like if a position becomes available on the big club, he might not be long for it. And of course, you've got Jake Bean, 20-year-old defenseman, offensive defenseman coming out of the dub as well. He's got himself 3 points in 12 games. He was the AHL all-rookie team in the regular season in his first year as a pro. He scored 13 goals, 31 assists for 44 points. That's very impressive. He hasn't been finding the net so much in the playoffs, but his regular season points kind of speak for themselves. And in goal, the Checkers are pretty solid. They've got Alex Nedeljkovic. I really like this kid. He had a really, really great junior career in the OHL. And since he's gone pro, he's kind of bounced back and forth between ECHL and AHL. But this season, he's really found his stride. In the AHL, he was regular season first team All-Star, AHL goalie of the year. His record was 34-9-5 with a 226 goals against average and a 916 save percentage. He's carried that over into the playoffs with an 8-3 record, 228 goals against and 914 save percentage. So Alex Nedeljkovic is really working his way up in the goalie prospect rankings. That's pretty much it for Charlotte. So moving over to Chicago, which is the Vegas Golden Knights affiliate. And remember, this team is really just 2 years old. I mean, Vegas made it to the Stanley Cup Finals last year. They made it into the playoffs again this year, and they kind of got some bad luck. And their AHL affiliate is in the finals, so everything's going great for that franchise. Their top scorer is a AHL veteran, of course, 28-year-old Curtis McKenzie. Last year, he led the Texas Stars to the AHL finals. So this is back-to-back finals for him. Came up short last year, so he'll be looking to amend that this year. The 28-year-old left winger has 8 goals and 14 points in the postseason. A more fantasy-relevant prospect for sure would be the next on the scoring list, and that's Cody Glass. He is their top prospect by far. He's 20-year-old center. He has 14 points in 19 games, and he'll be really challenging to make the Knights roster to start the season next year. Next guy on the list, Thomas Heika. He's a player that in their preseason games, I really liked him. I was impressed with his hustle and his speed, and he's got decent hands. He's 26 years old, and he's a restricted free agent, so he may or may not be back in the Vegas organization, but he's got 14 points in the playoffs, so that's not bad. Now the next player on the list, this one's kind of interesting. He's probably under the radar and could probably be available in a lot of your fantasy pools. His name is Zach Whitecloud, and he's a 22-year-old defenseman. So last year, at the end of the season, he signed as a NCAA free agent rookie, and he's in his rookie pro season in the AHL. And he has himself 13 points, 3 goals and 10 assists in 19 games. And he's one of their top scoring defensemen in the regular season as well. He is the AHL playoff scoring leader for defense. So this is a player that I think has got some pretty good sleeper sneaky value and for a lot of people in fantasy leagues. The next on the list is Nick Hague. He's another rookie defenseman. He is 20 years old. He's got himself 10 points. In his regular season, though, he had 32 points, which is pretty impressive. 13 goals, which is just great. 13 goals as a defenseman in the league is good, but let alone from a rookie. Keegan Kolsar, here's another interesting player. He's 22 years old. He's a right winger. He's a big guy, 6'2", 227. He's in his second season in the AHL, and he's taken a big step forward. He posted 36 points this season and has 90 penalty minutes. So he's a bit of a roto bangers and mash, keeping Carlson kind of player. So in the playoffs, he's got half point a game, 9 points in 18 games with 6 goals and 3 assists. So he's a player who I think has got some fantasy value in deeper leagues. The next couple of players are prospects who I'm going ahead and classifying in the bust section. Stefan Matteau scored the overtime game-winning goal in Game 1, by the way. 25 years old. He's an unrestricted free agent. Falls into that Group 6 category. He's got 18 points in 19 games, but I don't think Matteau's going to make it. The other one is Griffin Reinhart, 25 years old. Also Group 6 unrestricted free agent. He's got himself 7 points in 18 games in the postseason. Fun little side story on this. At my day job, I was chit-chatting with a player who's at Queen's University, and he went to... came from the Dub, and he played with Griffin Reinhart over there when they were in junior. And I asked him, I said, man, how come this kid, he's like a high-end draft pick, how come he's not making it in the NHL? He's looking like a bust. And he just kind of smiled and looked at me, and he said, yeah, he likes to party too hard. So that's unfortunate. Next player on the list, and I really like this guy, Gage Quinney. We spoke about him on an episode ages ago, back when Paul was hosting with me. So this is a guy who's another undrafted free agent coming out of the WHL, actually, not NCAA, but a WHL undrafted free agent. He is a Vegas-born kid, played some lower-level hockey in Vegas before going to the WHL. Signed as a free agent, and he played a season for Pittsburgh's affiliate, Wilkes-Barre-Scranton, and I think he had like 5 goals in 2 games to start his career, or something crazy like that. Of course, he wasn't able to sustain that pace, but he does have 3 goals and 6 points in 15 games. And he is under contract with Vegas for another season. So he's got another year to try and work his way up on the roster. Another player who I want to talk about is only played 4 games in the playoffs, and he's got no points. And that's rookie defenseman Dylan Coughlin. 21 years old. But why I want to talk about him is because he's been injured for the most part during the season. But during the playoffs. But during the season, he had 40 points, 15 goals, and 25 assists. So that's 40 points as a rookie in the AHL. So it's unfortunate that he missed a lot of playoff time. People might not have been as hip to him, but I just kind of wanted to shed a spotlight on him. Let you all know that this is a fantasy prospect that probably is available in your league and is probably someone that you want to put on your watch list or maybe even add. In the pipes, Chicago's got Oscar Dansk, and I like Oscar Dansk. He's been kind of up and down in his career. When he came over in the import draft to play with Erie, his first season wasn't very good, but then again, Erie was god-awful as well. Then Connor McDavid came along, and that all changed, and he was fantastic. Then he turned pro, and his first pro season was awful. I think he even went to Europe for a bit. But then he came back, and lo and behold, Vegas picked him up in the expansion, and their first year right out of the gate, they had all those injuries. Fleury got injured, and Subban got injured, and blah, blah, blah. Dansk played a bunch of regular season games for them, and he was just lights out. And then he even got injured, and they had to emergency recall someone from the OHL. I forget his name now. Anyways, he's been rock solid his whole time in Vegas. He had a great first season, great second season. He's followed that up, and he's been carrying them in the playoffs too. He's got a 10-6 record in the postseason, 2.31 goals against, and .918 save percentage. So if you get a chance to watch some AHL games, those are the players you want to be looking at off both teams for fantasy hockey scouting purposes. All right, so I'm going to take a little break here, and when I come back, I'm going to be chit-chatting with the man himself, Dobber, going over the fantasy prospect report and just talking fantasy hockey in general. So hang around for that. All right, so here's my little interview that I had earlier today with Dobber from Dobber Hockey, talking the prospect report. So, Dobber Prospects Radio, name of this podcast, and this is episode 55 or something like that, and it's the very first time we're getting Dobber on the Dobber Prospects Radio podcast. So it's a little bit overdue, but thanks for coming on, Dobber. How you doing, buddy?
I'm doing great. Thanks for having me.
Right on. And you just released your fantasy prospect guide. So that's kind of a lot of work off your plate for the moment. Do you have much time off before you start doing the fantasy guide that launches August 1st?
Yeah, I generally don't. I can't really do much with that until settle down.
Draft and free agency get in the rear view mirror, and you know where rosters are looking like, I suppose, huh?
Yeah, I can kick that off maybe July 6th. This month, I might prep some of the writers and get some of the planning prepared in advance, but content really just, yeah, I get a nice break.
Right on. So let's talk about the prospect report then that just came out. This is your lucky 13th edition. I've seen a couple of comments that you made on ramblings or social media and stuff, so just kind of wanted to get your take on a couple of things. One thing that I noticed, and this is in like the top 50 rankings too, you kind of favored the older players a little bit more heavily than the consensus rankings, and they kind of lean towards a little bit more of the 19 draft guys. Let's talk about the older versus younger aspect in prospect, which kind of for me boils down to the player's ETA versus their upside. So what do you put more emphasis on? How quickly you need to sit and stash them on your roster and wait and percolate on them, or how quickly can they contribute to your roster versus, okay, so they can come and contribute to my roster and start providing me 40, 50 points next year, and that's like the career best, or do I wait 5 years for a guy that might give me 70, 75 points? Is that kind of the stuff that's going through your mind when you're kind of looking at prospect rankings?
Yeah, you got to weigh that out. Naturally, the players being drafted now almost always will have a higher upside and better payoff. But you got to wait, or you got to weigh how long you got to wait for that, right? So a guy in the top 10 or top 20, maybe you're going to see him this year or next year at the latest.
Yeah. All right. So one player on the list that I thought was kind of a little bit polarizing was Gusev. You had him ranked as high as 4th. Cam had him there as well. The consensus had him all the way down at 12th. I would question if 4th might be a little bit low because, I mean, yeah, he's an older player, but he's coming over and he's just dominated everywhere he's played. And expectations for him are through the roof. I think he could jump in and have the same kind of impact that Panarin had when he came over. So I think maybe you could debate if whether or not 4th is a little bit too low. I think 12th is definitely low. Am I reading the tea leaves right on this one, or is there something else that's going on that you think has him a little bit lower on some of the consensus writers list?
I think no, I think you got it. I mean, I think he's only 12th because he missed on some lists. They just either weren't thinking of an older player like that at all. Just missed him, so that brought the average down. I don't know if go any higher than 4th. I mean, the 3 that are ahead of him are chippers, to say the least. So it's debatable, but any one of those 4, I think yeah, he might be actually.
Yeah, fair enough.
Is coming from, could be another Shipachyov situation. I mean, there's always that risk too. So
that's a very fair point. The Russian factor, you never know. He comes over, he plays, he may not like it, and he might say peace out. Moving on to the goalie list, you've got Elvis Merzlikins ranked really high. He's your number 2 ranked prospect. Tell me a little bit about why you're so high on Elvis.
That's another situation. It's, the wait time. Um, I just can't stand sitting on tenders. Like I remember when Samsonov was drafted, and he was picked up in my keeper league that year, and I'm just like, what? There's a roster spot for 6 years on him. I mean, and he might not even pay off, given that things are with goalies. You just it's a coin toss, no matter how great. And here we are. I think it's been 5 years now. Hasn't contributed. Lincoln's is right now. Columbus doesn't have a starting goalie.
Yeah.
But, I mean, the last time the team brought a European goalie into their lineup and made him their starter right away was Lundqvist. So I mean, it has happened. We probably knew as much about Lundqvist as we do about us now. So stranger things have happened. I think that's worth the risk. And the downside is Columbus signs a starter. Maybe who knows? Maybe someone like a Bazik or something could be a starter, but could also settle in as a backup without pressure. That would be the right way to go. But if they sign someone, then at worst, there's backup, but just to start.
Right. And not only that, but like Samsonov's got Braden Holtby in front of him as well on the roster that is kind of a roster blocker. All right, so that totally makes sense to me.
That's the reason I don't even have Caden Primo on that list. I look at that stuff. I mean, you got to look at what's ahead of them and the opportunities and the timing, right? Like this goalie's contract ends when this goalie comes. I've always thought that Shesterkin.
It does seem like we've been waiting forever on a couple of these goalie prospects. Okay, so let's talk about the format that you choose for the prospect rankings. You're looking at on an average or typical league that has about 12 to 15 teams, 25 to 35 players, and 4 to 8 prospect spots. Why did you choose those parameters? Is that like what you feel is just the most popular hockey pool size?
Yeah, I mean, you gotta find commonality as best you can. Two of my leagues are like that. Two of my keepers, and just based on some emails and feedback that I get, there are a lot of leagues that are around that. I mean, there's different amounts of keepers that leagues would have or stipulate, but there's all the other categories that can be added. If you get into stuff like that, you have a pretty fast, hard, difficult document to put together. So keep it simple, and so far it's worked.
Yeah, and I think as well because you're pretty clear about what the parameters for your rankings are and whatnot, and that if you're in a league that maybe mirrors the NHL and has 25 prospect players on it as opposed to 4 to 8, then you just kind of use some common sense and make some adjustments there. The players who are on the do not draft list for a 5 to 10 prospect team are very draftable. Otherwise, they wouldn't be in this fantasy report. That's why we're talking about them.
Yeah, exactly. And also, I think there's some value in putting a prospect in there that has no value, just to make clear to they were thinking there was some value, and this kind of settles the notion that no, there's that as well. But yeah.
Yeah, for sure. All right, let's get back to the goalies. There's one more goalie I wanted to talk to you about, and he's a player that I don't really have a lot of information on myself, so I'm really curious to see what you have to say about him. And because I don't really know much about him, I think he could have a lot of people could be sleeping on him, and he should be widely available in a lot of leagues. And that's Colorado goalie Pavel Francouz. What's the 411 on this guy?
Well, uh, came over to North America last year and had himself a great season. I think he transitioned well, and he was an unrestricted free agent this summer, guaranteed to get a contract. Probably going to get a one-way contract somewhere. And I was just impressed that Colorado made sure that he kept him, so he will be their backup. And another thing that I like about that situation is Grubauer. He he finished the season great. He's going to be a starter. I have a lot of confidence in him. But there's always the injury factor. You know, I don't. Frank Coos is a goalie that I wouldn't mind sitting on for a year, seeing how he is in a backup role. His numbers are like, and if that you can grow that future seasons.
Cool. Okay, so you also had a comment in your ramblings today or yesterday about how every year when you go through this and you comb over all the team's prospects and you read up on everything all the research that you've done on the teams that you write for and all of the prospects that have been provided for you by the writers, and a couple players always jump out to you. Two players that you named this year are Buffalo Sabres center Victor Olofsson and San Jose Sharks Sasha Shamlevsky. Why did these guys jump out to you? Why are they your picks this year for breakout prospects?
In the case of Olsen, he, really he went when guys come over to North America like that, and they make this kind of quick impact. And Olofsson came right over and first year, Rochester almost a point a game, 30 goals. I mean, to me that gets my attention. I really like that. Also, I like the situation in Buffalo. I just think that it's a team that's in growth mode, obviously, and just getting started. I think that a long ways to go before they become a really great high-scoring team, but they're well on their way. And there's room for him. And just the situation works, how quickly he adapted works, and then even in 6 games with the Sabres, he got 4 points, so he kind of made an impression that way too. So he's just raced up the list of the past year. And with Shamlevsky, I mean, he caught my eye doing the prospects report last year. Just really, just how well he's done internationally, and just San Jose always seems to find that one top forward every year that they just kind of filter into their lineup like a conveyor belt of talent, So he's so Shalevsky, sure enough, this year, at the World Juniors, to me, he really caught my eye, and so maybe I kind of went into prospects report with a bit of bias already, but there's nothing that I've seen that I dislike. How I performed in the playoffs, and internationally, just when the pressure's on and when it counts the most, his production steps up even more. So these are the kind of guys that I really I don't think he's going to slide into the line next year, but the year after, I think he can move as quickly as Kevin LeBlanc.
Yeah, the World Juniors is as a tool that I really like to use to scout prospects too for fantasy hockey, and I look at players who stand out there, and it's risky business because you often see players who do really well at the World Juniors and then aren't able to translate that success over to the NHL, and yet I still watch the World Juniors every year, and I fall in love with certain players, and like Martin Revi, and then they just never they never translate it in the NHL. So I always try to limit my own bias on that as well. But it's a challenge, and But then again, fantasy hockey is you go into it for a couple of reasons: to win some money, or to have bragging rights over your friends, or just to kind of test your own um, ability to identify players, and you put them on your roster, and then when those players make it, it's very satisfying. It's super rewarding, isn't it?
Yeah. Oh, it sure is. And especially if they're later picks. I mean, you pick a guy first overall in your draft or second overall. No, it's not satisfying at all. You take that guy fourth round or near the end of the draft, and whoa. I remember taking Jake Gensel, one of the last picks of my draft that year. Might be the best pick for that area of the draft in history of our history of our pool.
Who are some of your personal biggest hits and maybe some of your biggest misses? Players that you thought were going to be legit and never made it, or players that you thought wouldn't make it and despite that they did.
For some reason, I remember the failures more. The two that stick out the most are both Blue Jackets. I'm sure you know Filatov. I mean, that was a matter of injuries happening at the wrong time and attitude and just some things that as goalies you can't really control. What you can go by is the talent and the fitness level and the upside and the opportunity, and he had all those things and nothing worked. And then do you remember Jaroslav Balastik?
I kind of do, and I remember he picked up the ballistic missile moniker.
Yeah, so I got him. I don't know, 4-round draft, and I think it took him the second round.
Oops.
He was not anywhere. Did he even play in the NHL?
Yeah, he ended up being a dud. Here's a funny Filatov story. I don't remember who I heard this from, but when he was in Ottawa, I remember just before he got traded, or cut loose or whatever it was they did with him. I heard a story that the coaches pulled him in for a meeting and they were showing him some video, and a lot of it was like they're trying to coach him on going to the net, driving to the net, and looking for second chances and all that. And in the middle of the meeting, and they're showing him all these clips, he stands up, says to the coaches, "Philly don't do rebounds," and walked out. Isn't that amazing? I don't know if that's true or not, but if it is, it's a fantastic story, and I'll never forget it. That's a great story. I seem to remember the hits more than the misses, although I have more misses than hits. Selective memory, I guess. Andreas Athanasiou was one of my favorite hits. I've been in love with this kid since he was in the OHL in Bay Area. I saw him playing against the Frontenacs, and his speed was evident even then. But what stood out to me was that he could do things with the puck while traveling at warp speed. Like um, carry the puck, stick handle, keeps his head up, making passes, and I thought that was a very translatable skill to pro hockey, and so I got lucky on that one. I think my biggest miss was Brian Fogarty. Do you remember him?
Yep.
Oh man, I mean his junior hockey records are just gross, and he did it all while he was drunk at 15 years old too. He's a player that I thought, like, despite his issues and his problems, he's still going to make it to the NHL because he's just that talented. But unfortunately, he was never able to put it together. Oh, that was a fun little sidetrack. Um, all right, so let me ask you another question here while I got some time with you. What are some other favorite prospects you learned about building the prospect report? We talked about Olofsson and Shemleski. Is there a couple other guys in there that you're like, gonna maybe try and draft him this summer?
Yeah, I mean, yeah, you jot down notes, like High Rose on Detroit. I got a weird hunch about Starrett, the goalie for the Oilers. It's just not because of pedigree or his talent. of him. Is it just from opportunity again? And I don't have much faith in Edmonton's current goalie, and really, what other choices they have right now. So it would depend on who they sign this summer. But there's him. And,
Okay, let's talk a little bit back up a tad there, and you mentioned Taro Hirose, NCAA undrafted player, signed as a free agent by Detroit, had a cup of coffee at the end of the season, didn't look out of place. NCAA undrafted free agent signings seems to be a revenue stream for scouts that has kind of been untapped in the past. Is it just me, or is the quality of free agent players getting better? Or maybe it's because the league size is expanding. I guess the most successful NCAA free agent signing in history could arguably be Tyler Bozak. So we're not talking about franchise players here. Do you think Taro Hirose could set the bar for best NCAA free agent signing?
Rosie, see, I didn't know how to pronounce that. I think I've seen him play when he got to Detroit, or if I did, I didn't. It's going High Rose. It's spelled High Rose. Is it Rosie?
I think that's how you pronounce it. I watched some college games. That's what the announcers.
In college. Okay.
Yeah.
No, I'm just on this guy. I go strictly by what my scouts report in. So. No, I think these guys. I don't think the quality has gone up any. I mean, because the quality of drafting and finding the guys has gone up as well. So it's like there's late bloomers, and that's always been there. I mean, even wasn't Mike Ridley undrafted player who was signed out of Canadian University even.
That's going back.
There's always been guys. That's always been the case, and every year we see a dozen, maybe 24 NCAA players get signed. Maybe a dozen of them catch our eye, and one pan out each year, and that's really what it works out to. And right now, though, it looks like Hirose is that guy. Though he's the one because he went straight in there and got eight-game point streak or 7 games to start his career.
Yeah, Max Verona looked pretty good in Ottawa too. So taking into consideration, what's that?
That's right. Yeah.
Yeah, so taking into consideration what we talked about right off the hop, older players versus younger players and the ETA and the upside and all that, I would say the upside for college free agent signing players is pretty modest. I mean, to your point, they were never drafted for a reason. They're late bloomers and all that, but I wouldn't count on these guys being more than 50-point players at best. However, you don't have to wait 5 years to find out what you got. You'll know within a year. Even if they're assigned in the AHL, you know if they're going to be worth keeping or not, if they have, any sort of NHL upside. And if they can't get out of the AHL in their first season, then, they're probably 24, 25 by the time they get out of college. So
that's a big appeal to me too. Yeah. I mean, I'd rather swap out a 24, 25-year-old 5 times. 5 straight years. Just take a chance on one of these guys. Didn't work. Take a chance on another one. Didn't work. Keep doing that. And you give me 5 chances, one of them will work. I'd rather do that than take a guy who's 18, sit on him for 5 years, and 50-50, he doesn't make it anyway.
So your appetite for that, does that change based on the number of keeper spots you're allowed to have for prospects? If we're talking like 4 to 8 prospects, then absolutely, I get that. The leagues I'm in, I get like 25 prospect spots.
Get up over 12, I don't mind. I'll take guys that I'll sit on for 6 years, sure.
Yeah, I kind of do a little bit of both.
Yeah, I mean, if you have 25, I would have at least 10 spots open, or just to sit there and let guys marinate.
And hope for the franchise kind of 75-point upside player, right? Yeah.
And then maybe 3 years in, you'll be able to drop a couple. You'll see that they're not going down the right path. Bring in 3 more. But that those 10 spots would always be for the long-term guys. And yeah, that kind of league, it's a completely different mindset for sure.
Yeah, I think a lot of the people that listen to my podcast might be in leagues that are a little bit more than, 5 to 10 sort of prospects. So with that in mind, what kind of advice do you have for people who are, and I'm using air quotes here, scouting prospects for fantasy hockey? What are some things that you would recommend looking for guys when they're watching, anything from Europe to World Juniors to CHL to AHL games? What are some things that, I mean, aside from the opportunity on the roster, because that's kind of out of the player's hands, what kind of skill sets and attributes are you looking that you think are translatable to the NHL?
Just watching, what I like to see is the hustle and the tenacity. I don't like a lot of floating, a lot of
We're looking at you, Josh Hosang.
yeah, and I mean a lot of hanging on the outskirts, and and also like to see intelligence. That's harder to see. You got to kind of watch the player multiple times to get that, but that's something else that I like as well.
What does that look like?
Just finding the man and finding the man that not even you as an observer sees. I mean, what he sees, and he does that once. That could be just reasonable, good talent. Does that twice, maybe there's a bit of luck too. But if you're seeing stuff like that, or covering, covering the defense or the defenseman moves up or pinches and covering, just little things like that just good smart plays. That when you see that game over game, then you can attribute that to hockey sense. What I also like to do is look at the quality of teammates too, because sometimes, on paper, it's his numbers aren't that impressive, or you're a little disappointed. Then you're going to the game and you're seeing, well, look who he's playing with. That's kind of a big one as well. So that's. Yeah, if you're watching a game for the purpose of fantasy hockey, that's the sort of things that I look at.
All right. And a lot of people don't have access to every league. I mean, you watch your local CHL team on Cogeco or whoever it is, or maybe you subscribe to an AHL package. You watch European players when they come on international tournaments, or if you're in Europe, it's hard to get CHL coverage games there. So for people who are trying to get information on prospects and can't watch them either live or on TV very often, is there anything that you would recommend for getting information? I mean, of course, buy the prospect report. That's what we're talking about right now. Check out Dobber Prospects. Most players have a profile there. And then you've got your frozen pools for players who are in the NHL. What are some other things that you would sites that you use maybe, or ways that you do online research on prospects?
I don't get any exposure to college. I don't watch or have college games, and the Europeans as well, other than YouTube highlight clips and the guy, but you can't really pick up anything from it. So, aside from what you can dig up online from websites, including Dobbers Prospects, when you look through their stats pages, and you don't just look at numbers, you look at their numbers and the way they compare year over year, but also league over league, and you also want to look at again the team. How's the rest of the team doing? He has 60 points, and everyone else on the team has 70. Well, 60 isn't as good then. his production went down one year instead of up. Why is that? So who was on the team last year and left? Would make that kind of impact. And I just look at reasons for changes in the numbers, and I use that along with comments that I read and come up with a judgment on those players.
That is a very good tip. I like that. All right, last question for you, man. It's a hypothetical situation. Let's say you inherit a fantasy team. It's a big league. It's a 20-team league with a full NHL roster and a full prospect bench. And of course, everyone inherits sinking ships. You know, GMs who have winning teams don't bail on those teams. So the team you inherit is in last place. You've got the first overall pick in the coming draft. You've got 2 to 3 roster players that are getting interest from other GMs in your league as assets. You've got 2 to 3 players who are A kind of prospects, but basically the rest of the roster is just kind of roster spot fillers. What would be a strategy that you would look at to rebuild that, and how long do you think it would take you to turn that team into not just competitive, but like a contender?
Well, the deeper the league, the harder the turnaround. If it's a 20-team league, as you say, big rosters, it's going to be a long time. I mean, with aggressive trading and really good and lucky drafting, maybe you can get it. Maybe I can do it in 7 years, in 6. But if I get some bad luck, or everyone in the league is really good, so trading, there's no there's no highway robberies to be had in a trade, and you're not going to do great on the draft because everyone else is doing great. Then you're looking at a decade. It'll be tough. But what I do is I pick my 1 or 2 untouchables and keep my A prospects, and really everyone else is gone. And I make sure that I try and acquire as many draft picks as I can first, and make sure that when I leave the draft, everyone on my team I at least like. Maybe it's a prospect that's 8 years out, but at least I like them,
give you something to look forward to, right? Something to cheer about.
You can always swap them out next year, whatever. But I can't stand seeing. There's one league I'm in where and it's pretty deep, like 35 players and teams. But there's a couple of GMs that left that draft with 3 guys on their team that are still dropsies, and to me, that's just waste. I mean, throw it away. Get 3 draft picks and replace those. Always make sure you have a team that has players that are at least ownable. That should be your goal on the first draft.
I think my biggest pet peeve in fantasy drafts is people who are MIA for the draft and get auto drafted with like first round picks. I'm like Dave Hodge. I'm flipping my pen in the air going, why didn't you trade that pick then if you're just going to let it auto draft?
Yeah. I got rules in my league that I run that requires attendance. So I think you miss 3 out of 5 drafts, then you're out.
Yeah, I mean, I think if you miss an auto draft, it just goes to the highest drafted player from the entry draft, because our draft takes place a couple days after the entry draft. So if you don't show up, you get the next highest ranked player that was drafted just recently the other day in the NHL. I think it should be the opposite. I think it should just be you get nothing. You blew it. You weren't there. You missed it.
Maybe you get that last pick in the 7th round.
Yeah, maybe. Or maybe you get the ballistic missile. All right, man. Well, thanks very much for giving me a couple minutes of your time today. I poured over the fantasy guide, the prospect report, that is, the other day. It's great stuff. I enjoyed contributing to it for the last couple of years. I wasn't in on it this year, so I'm just really enjoying it as a fan more than anything this year. It's something that I refer to throughout the year when I get people making me trade offers for and offer me some prospects. It's always good to get that opinion on it. And I'm looking forward to the fantasy guide for the NHL players. It's coming out in the start of the summer. That's a must-have as well if you're in any kind of fantasy league. That's a must-have. We talked a little bit about the site, about Dobber prospects, frozen pools. You can follow Dobber on Twitter at Dobber Hockey. What else is coming up on your sites there, bud?
Well, they're all going to be relaunched soon. I tried to time the relaunch of the shop for the release of this prospects report, and that didn't work out. I still have the test page on my screen here in front of me, actually. It's still got a few things to fix on it, but it'll be more modernized, long overdue relaunch of everything. And hopefully by the end of the summer, all the Dobber sites will have that. And the one thing I want to note about the prospects report, I get sometimes comments that people wish it was updated September or October, and at least get the draft picks into their teams after they're drafted. So just to comment on that, if the players' names are linked, so if you click on the name, and it'll take you to their profile page on Dobber Prospects, and they will more often than not have an update, especially with the players being drafted in later this month. They're going to be in there. They're going to be have updates, so you will have basically an update right from just a click of the link, right from this prospects report. So as far as updating the actual report goes, once we get to into July, I focus on the fantasy guide, and that's where my work goes, and that's where all the updating goes. So that's why the actual physical report doesn't get updated late in the summer. But we do keep the website updated, and any of those players will link to those updates.
Yeah, and I can add to that as well. Dobber Prospects runs a summer series. It's a program that I started when I was managing out of there a few years ago. So in the month of July, it is the 31 and 31 series, where each day an article comes out reviewing the NHL team of that day. So it starts in alphabetical order. So Anaheim is on the 1st of July. And it's all about an update on how that team did from the draft, the players that they picked, where they fit in the organizational depth chart, prospects, camps that they have right after the draft. Of course, as you get later in the month, more and more of those become completed. So Anaheim and Arizona's might not have happened by the time that their teams are posted, but all that kind of information you can find on Dobber Prospects on those team pages. And then in August, the dog days of summer, it's more summer series 31 and 31, and then each one takes a look at and includes all of the prospects' organizational rankings and reviews. So you get a top 10 update on players who are on the rise, players who are graduating from junior, starting their pro career, where that might be, either NHL or AHL. So those are really great series to read. If you're a fan of that team, it's really great. And of course, if you're in fantasy hockey, it's great. You got to read them all, though, because we don't link them all up together like one report. It's just individual articles. But you can find those this summer on Dobber Prospects. It's great complimentary reading to the prospect report that just came out. And you can get that on dobberhockey.com. You click the shop link, and you can purchase it. You can purchase packages. What are the price points for the packages there, Dobber?
$29.99 for the Ultimate Fantasy Pack that has everything for the year. $16.99 for the Keeper League Pack. That's just the prospects report and the fantasy guide and the preseason draft list all combined. So really, it's like getting if you buy the prospects report, it's like getting the fantasy guide for $2. So those are the two packages they sell each year.
That is good value. The fantasy guide also has some prospect information on it, but it's a lot more limited, isn't it?
Yeah, more along the lines of who's the prospects who are going to be on the team and helping this year. So
Right.
Digs into that, and it reflects on the draft a little bit as well. But the focus is on getting you primed up for the season ahead.
Yeah, of course. All right, man. Thanks very much for your time, and I look forward to reading that fantasy guide when it comes out. Some summer reading in August, bud.
All right, thank you.